So I'm going to introduce Brian Rumsey. He's our next presenter. Um, he, I guess your farm is called like Let's Grow Wonder, right, Brian? Yeah, yeah. So, Brian has been on our practical backyard tour in the past. He also has a neighborhood stand with his children off of Grand Boulevard, gives little farm tours. He, I would say, is exceptional at 3D growing and using vertical space. So let's hear from Brian.
All right, thank you, Jenna. So yeah, I'm excited to share here some of what we do, and so yeah, Jenna's right on track in describing that we are kind of like a lot of what we do is sort of backyard gardening for our own production, our family's use. So I think in some ways this is going to be a nice contrast with Schaefer's presentation, which was much more focused on scaling up commercially. That said, and this is really a family affair. So my wife and daughters are actually here. I'm sure they'll speak up if I forget or misstate anything. I'll give them a chance to mention anything that I might have forgotten that's important. But anyhow, so it is a lot of what we do is for family usage. They do have their farm stands, so they will sell things to the neighbors. They do like sort of a mini CSA, and we do a little bit of production for some local restaurants as well. So we're a bit commercial, even though we're more residential and producing for our own usage. Uh, a lot of this is happening in our big backyard. We do have some other land that we're starting to expand onto as well. So we're sort of straddling that line, but it's hard to know whether to call our project a garden or a farm because like it's either a really big garden or a small farm, depending on how you think about it. So what I've got here for my presentation, I've got mainly just a lot of images that will help illustrate our approach here. A couple of short videos, and I do have a bit of documentation, some text later on. But I wanted to start with this image, which I was kind of looking through my files, and I think this one is maybe about the best representation that I could find for what we do as sort of as a whole. So as Jenna mentioned, we really do try to do this. I guess you would call it 3D gardening, in which we really try to make the most use not just of the square footage we have, but the vertical space that we have as well. And you can see that here. So this is probably midsummer, I would say. And so a lot of our elements are here. You can see how we have these trellis systems to grow upward. You can see the arch supports we use. We make a lot of use of heavy mulch. Do you need me to do anything with this? Saving a recording. And uh, yeah, different things visible here. We try to integrate pollinating plants. We have some milkweeds up front. We have tomatoes. We have cucurbits, squash, loofahs. We have some artichokes up front. We have a lot of tomatoes, corn. So we'll go through and we'll take a little bit of a closer look at a lot of that. But just to begin with, maybe I can speak to some of our general philosophies. Um, so we have a variety of things we're trying to do. Um, one of the things we try to do is we want to try to keep maintenance and harvest as simple as possible. We want to reduce weed pressure. We want to maintain soil moisture, maintain airflow to reduce foliar disease pressure. But then also part of our philosophy is when we've seen gardens, we see a lot of gardens that are about production, right? Like their intention is to maximize production. And there's also gardens that are about creating a place of beauty, a place to see the flowers. And so what we really want to do is integrate both of those approaches. So creating a place that invites people to spend time in, and so that's really a lot of where we do our living during the summer. But yet it's also a very productive place. So it's doing that side of things as well. So I'll move ahead next to see a couple of short videos. So these are sort of walkthroughs of some of what the garden looks like at various times. So just 15, 20 seconds, somewhere like that. So this one wraps up with something that I particularly like to point out as an example of our 3D gardening. So we have the squash that grows. It starts out on these arches. Then we have the trellises of in this case the tomatoes. But what we can see here is the squash is actually reaching out and then ends up going right above the tops of where the tomatoes are going. So that's a sort of a classic example of the maximizing space usage. This sort of 3D gardening, you might call it. So that's one. I will move ahead to one additional video walkthrough. Let's see. I think that was the same slide, right? There we So this is at the very end of the growing season in mid-October, right before it starts to get frosty. These are bananas, yeah. I'll speak more specifically to it, yeah. And so one of the things I'd like to point out about this is I think relatively speaking that this garden still looks pretty well, pretty productive, pretty well in control compared to a lot of what you see by mid-October. And a lot of what our approach accomplishes, I think, is really keeping plants in a situation where they're viable, under control, and continue to be productive deep into the season, as opposed to like before we learned all the techniques that we do now. It'd be like Labor Day, the thing was a tangled mess. You could hardly get in and do anything anymore. But so a lot of what we've done is really developing our practices relating to training, space management, that type of thing. So I'll speak more to that as we go here. We do grow a lot of tomatoes, and I will offer a contrast here to Schaefer in that almost all of our tomatoes are the indeterminates, the ones that grow and grow and grow. And both types of tomatoes are they have really good reasons to grow them in different situations. If you're going to be scaling up commercially like Schaefer does, it really makes a lot of sense to grow the determinates. So you can harvest them all at the same time, so you don't have to worry about the trellising or the staking, things like that. If, however, you're trying to maximize use of a limited amount of space, I would certainly point you to the indeterminates, the ones that keep growing, because if you're on a limited amount of space, you can't plant a new set of tomatoes every 2 weeks, right? Because you just don't have that much space. So what this is nice for, among other things, is to keep the production rolling in with a minimum amount of space used. So I'll take you next to just a snapshot of the very beginning of the growing season. So this is what things look like mid-May or so, uh, just like any garden will. And so the reason I wanted to put this in here is just to speak to the thought that you need to put into how to space things when you get started, uh, because it feels like when you plant these tiny little seedlings, you're giving so much space up, right? Like you look at this garden here, it's like, well, look at all that blank space. Like, can't I just squeeze a few more things in there? But then, of course, when it gets to August, September, it can turn in the other direction where you actually feel like, okay, well, where'd all my space go? So sometimes our approach would be sort of in line with what people call square foot gardening, where you're really trying to maximize your area. I wouldn't say that's quite what we do in terms of trying to squeeze as much in as possible. Uh, I mean, that's an interesting approach. I think it does create some challenges, particularly related to some of the disease pressures that Kathleen was talking about, uh, and the manageability issues. So, like for instance, our tomatoes, we'll generally space the rows 5 feet apart, which seems like way too much, or the first month of the season. But by the time September and October rolls around, we're really happy that we have that space because it remains manageable, which you'll see some other representations too soon as well. So as far as spacing, that's really going to depend on the type of plant you're talking about. Some of them, there's a lot more flexibility. So like the indeterminate tomatoes, for example, that depends a lot on how you manage it. If you want to manage them very carefully, you could plant those 2 feet apart and you could make that work. Or if you want to let them expand, you could plant them 5 feet apart and they will make use of that. Other types of plants, there isn't so much flexibility to how they grow. Take peppers, for example. They just sort of have a growth habit that they maintain. So you're going to want to plant those maybe 3 feet apart, and it just doesn't work as well to try to squeeze them together because their habit is more specific. So moving ahead, I'll talk in more detail about some of the ways we're doing this. So we use various forms of trellising. One that we've discovered just a couple of years ago and have used more ever since is this probably like is as a nylon. I think it's some sort of synthetic material for a trellis. You can buy it. I haven't found it locally, but you can buy it on Amazon. It comes in panels that are roughly like 32 feet long, 6.5 feet tall. So that's a good bit of coverage. Those are costing you like $20 to $25. You can easily cut them with some scissors for the length that you need. So that has become one of our mainstays in our vining plant growing. Yeah, good question. So, what you need to do exactly is you need to make sure that they're held upright. And so, what this material is really nice for is that as the plants are growing, you just go through weekly, maybe would you say weekly to twice a week or so, and you just sort of pop them through, as long as you don't let it get away from you, it's really easy. So you just give it a little shove just to sort of give it the guidance for where you want it to go. So that is that's oh yep we will illustrate that here shortly. So this is basically kind of zooming out a little bit, seeing the same thing. So we generally start those nets maybe knee high or so, so then they end up about this high. So that gives you up to 8 feet of growing. So yeah, the question then is how do we do that? How do we support those nets? And so this is a little bit better example of an illustration of how we're doing that. So what we do, the approach that we found, so we use a steel T posts. Those come in lengths typically between 6 to 8 feet. So we'll drive those in a couple of feet into the ground. Then we extend those T posts with these. These are like the ultra heavy duty bamboo posts. You can find those at Menards or your other sort of hardware type stores. And we fasten those with hose clamps. Um, like we kind of joke that our garden is put together with T posts and hose clamps. Um, and those are pretty sturdy. Like that will hold a decent amount of weight. You do want to keep the tomatoes harvested. Like we have had cases where these have actually snapped if you let it get too heavy. But for the most part, it holds up pretty well. So that you could even take that higher than 8 feet, but you don't want to get too high just because it's hard to manage once you're having to reach way up there. You don't want to be standing on a ladder for that. So 6 to 8 feet, somewhere in there would be what we go for. Other questions so far? So I just have a couple of more illustrations of what things are looking like. So uh, this is sort of mid-season growth here. I guess one of the other things I want to show on this slide is that we don't just use the mesh netting. There's other approaches we use as well. What we have here, this is just like the twine, jute or sisal twine. So in that case, there's a particular method that's called the Florida weave, where you basically sort of weave your twine on from one side of one plant to the other side of the other plant, and then back around. And so that is cheaper in terms of the amount of twine that you have to purchase. It is more labor intensive than the mesh netting because you actually have to walk through each time rather than just poking them through. It's a little bit more frustrating if the plants aren't growing at the same speed, because with the mesh netting, it doesn't matter if one plant's down there and the other plant's up there. You just sort of weave them as they're ready. Anyhow, that was an approach that we had learned first, so we were doing that. We still do that some. So then just some photos here to represent how really it keeps the harvest in the garden manageable. Even little kids like our daughters are able to get through, help with the harvest. So a couple of photos representing that. Okay, then another thing you'll see a lot of in our garden space is these arches, sort of they are serving as trellises. And we typically build these out of those cattle panels that you can find at places like Fleet Farm or Farm and Fleet, the farm supply stores. So this is a pretty common approach. Like we're not unique in doing this, uh, but we found it works really well. And these are very durable. So these can hold a lot more weight than those mesh trellises that I mentioned before. We do actually use some of these cattle panels for tomatoes as well. Like you put them horizontally, you attach those to T-posts. Those will hold a lot. Those are not going to collapse even with a huge bumper crop of tomatoes on them. But they're great for other vining crops. So what you see here is we've got a couple varieties of squash. We've also done melons on these. I'll have images of that. Cucumbers work well on these. Various flowers, so they can be ornamental as well as productive. Um, one of the videos, I think maybe that first video I played had a bunch of butternut squashes hanging from one of those trellises. So they work really well for that. It's actually really impressive how well a lot of different fruits as in vegetables as well will hang on here. So like we've had 20-pound squashes hanging down from there. Chapina, my wife, has actually had some collisions with those and ended up with a bit of a headache because she ran into them, but they hung on. They didn't fall off. So that is surprisingly effective how the plants are able to do that. So we really like this because if you're going to plant squash in a relatively small space, it's going to go all over the place, right? You no doubt experienced that. But what we can do here is instead of having it all go, you'll take up all of your garden space, it goes up instead. And so it minimizes the amount of space used. Eventually, if you have a place for it to roam, it can kind of shoot out over some of the other garden area. Uh, and it adds interest to the garden space as well. So it's achieving a variety of things here, both ornamentally but also productively. So this is mid-season. This is probably July or so. That whole trellis would eventually get covered, as well as the ones in the background. What we also see here is a variety of the mulches that we use. So we mulch pretty heavily, and that's pretty critical to a couple of things, both to weed control, but also to moisture control. Even during these extremely dry summers we've been having in the past few years, we basically do no watering at all. And that's because of the moisture retention that this mulching helps with. I will say that that's also partly dependent on your soil type. Like some soils that don't hold moisture as well, you're probably going to need to water even if you have a lot of mulch down. In our case, the bigger issue for us is that our soils do hold water pretty well, so that can actually be a problem like during really wet periods. But during drier periods, especially with the mulch, it holds up really nicely. Just a couple more arch images here. How are we doing on time, Jenna? 5 minutes. All right. Yep, we can definitely work with that. All right, so this is a representation of, to just to show that even like melons, like I wouldn't necessarily plant one of the biggest varieties of watermelon possible. That's going to probably put some undue strain on the vine. But this is like a mid-sized watermelon. It hangs on just fine. So we've done that. We've done cantaloupes. Cantaloupes are actually a little bit more challenging because some types of cantaloupes like to come off of the vine when they're fully ripe. Those are called the slip. I forget what it is, slip joint or something like that. But anyhow, so you want to look for the non-slip varieties that don't slip off at full ripeness. Otherwise, you're going to have all your ripe cantaloupes falling down and splitting on the ground, which is frustrating. But there are varieties that will hold on, so you just look for that in the variety description. And so, yeah, some things do vine more naturally than others. Like probably the acorn squash we found is a squash that is most adapted to this. It just really wants to climb. You don't even have to give it much of any training. The butternut squashes, you have to kind of give it a little bit of guidance. Cantaloupes, even more so. Like you sometimes might have to tie them on with some twine or something. So it is a little bit of work, but but not that bad. You know, like with the squash, you just sort of pop them through. Uh, Takes just a couple of minutes, a couple times a week. Even tying up is not that bad, and really does help to maximize when you have a a limited amount of space that you're working with. So one more view there, I guess, of the tunnels. So then this was just another view I wanted to show of some of our mulching. Um, and what's nice about this mulch is it's all organic. So like if you till it in the next year, and it's adding soil fertility, adding organic matter, I guess more than fertility, but contributing to building your soil over time. Um, and this is builder's paper. And it might sound like a weird thing, but this is actually a key part of our anti-weed strategy. So what we do is we put this builder's paper down first, then we put the mulch above it. We started by doing what's sometimes called like the lasagna gardening, where you hold on to your old cardboard, you put that down, and then that kills the weeds. That worked nicely. What we discovered though is that we didn't have enough cardboard, and the cardboard is thick, so like the end of the year you have to pull it back out if you're going to do something the next year. uh, Ideally with that approach you let the cardboard sit for several years and it breaks down. But then what we realized is you can go to Menards and you can get a roll of builder's paper. It's like 180 feet by 36 inches, I think, something like that, for maybe $12. So that proved to be way more easy to work with than trying to hold on to all of our cardboard. Not only do you have to piece together a little piece of cardboard, you're just rolling this out. So that's a bit of a cost, but manageable, and really does pretty impressively in terms of weed suppression. It's biodegradable, and since it's thinner paper instead of the thick cardboard, that will often break down in 1 year, particularly if it's not been a super dry year, if you got some moisture there, to help it break down. So that's been a nice tool for us. Yeah, because it's typically pretty well broken down anyway. Um, if it like in what we will sometimes do is we'll maybe like rake off whatever comes up easily was loose, and then put that aside in the compost pile. But then a lot of this will just stick around, like it's half decomposed anyway, so it sort of just falls apart by the next year. Oh yeah. Yeah, so if you're in like if you're doing this in a backyard situation, one of the challenges at the edge of your garden can be like that the weeds want to come in from the yard, right? Like especially if it's a no spray yard, and you got creeping Charlie hiding out in there that wants to creep into the garden. So this brick or paver border has been really nice for us because that reduces that incoming weed pressure. So that's made a big difference. So I wanted to talk at least briefly about companion planting as a way of wrapping things up. And companion planting has a lot of different benefits, some of which Kathleen was talking about. It can provide benefits in terms of attracting beneficial insects. It can provide benefits in terms of how things need to grow with each other. It can provide benefits in terms of seasonality, maximizing your space. So what I wanted to show here, this is not actually our garden. But this is I was looking for a representation of the classic Three Sisters approach: the corn, the beans, and the squash, which is dates all the way back to indigenous Americans. And this is kind of the ideal companion system because each one of the three components provides something that the others need. So corn is very hungry. It takes a lot of nitrogen. But you plant it with beans, which fix nitrogen. So they actually put nitrogen into the soil. And then the beans need someplace to climb if they're pole beans, so they climb the corn. Then the squash, what that does, what that adds to the system is it runs along the ground. It's got these nice broad leaves, so it shades the surface, which accomplishes a couple things. It reduces the amount of evaporation, but less moisture loss. But then that shade also prohibits or reduces the ability of other weeds to get established. So it's this beautiful system that has been used for thousands of years, and is still effective in the present. Um, then I think this is my last slide here. Just wanted to speak to some other companion planting ideas. some of which apply specifically to maximizing your space when you're working with limited amounts of space. So like like the trellis squash, you can do that up high, and then you can use that space down below to plant other things. So you're using that space on two levels. Uh, the squash does explode in area, but not to a lot of that really happens deep into the season, like was you already gotten your other crops established. So like those tomatoes I showed you way back at the end of that video with the squash above them. That might have been more of a problem if the squash was showing up there in June, but it doesn't get out that far till like August or so. So at that point, the tomatoes are already really well established. Uh, so I won't necessarily try to talk through every one of these. We do a lot with tomatoes, as you notice. Those are probably like one of our favorite crops. So what can you do in between your tomatoes? Well, maybe you realize that tomatoes grow relatively slowly for the first couple of months that they're planted. So if you can actually interplant them with something maybe that's an early season plant, so like your onions, when are you going to plant your onions? Maybe within the next month or so. So you plant a row of onions, but you leave some gaps for where you're going to put in the tomatoes. Those onions are going to be ready to harvest by midsummer, at which point the tomatoes are just really starting to come into their own as far as they're growing. So if you're Schaefer, you might not want to do that because that's going to be more labor to try to go through and take out those onions where you've got your tomatoes. But if you're a backyard gardener, somebody who's trying to maximize 500 square feet of space or less, something like that, then you really want to be thoughtful about trying to you do as much as you can with the space. Lettuce, same thing. Lettuce is a cool weather crop for the most part. So if you can get your lettuce planted in between your tomatoes, or even where the tomatoes are going to go before you plant them, that lettuce is going to be ready to harvest by maybe June or early July. You take that out just as the tomatoes are really starting to explode in size. Um, we do really encourage and advocate planting pollinator plants, milkweed, for example, even throughout a vegetable garden, for a variety of reasons. I mean, one is just the beauty that it adds, but also attracts pollinators, which are then beneficial for your garden, like your vegetables as well. Nasturtium is a sort of a ground cover that we've really gotten interested in the last couple of years. Really covers the ground nicely. It's very pretty, and it's actually edible itself, both the flowers and the leaves. So maybe, and I just remembered that I did actually add a couple of slides that I thought people might wonder about, because everybody always asks us, how do we grow bananas in Iowa? And so what you have to do, there are some varieties of bananas that can survive the winter here, but they need a little bit of help to make it through the winter. So what we do very end of the season is we chop those back to maybe 3-4 feet tall. That's what you can see going on right here. We put straw bales around them. Then in the middle of the straw bales, we put these decomposed leaves. So it's like sort of a solid protection. It's pretty remarkable. I've put in thermometer probes to keep track of the temperatures in there. It never freezes. Even when we get down to to 15 or 20 below zero. Like last week when it was so cold, it was like 38 degrees in there. So what you have then is you start the season with like 3 or 4 foot of banana trunk, and it takes off by May or so. In fact, like I will usually cover this with a tarp. The banana plants actually like will rip through the tarp probably by the end of April if you don't take the tarp off. That's how vigorous they are. So and that's mostly sort of a fun thing. Like we've never actually gotten edible bananas off of that, but really adds some visual intrigue to the garden. And we do some cooking with bananas, like traditional types of cooking that use banana leaves. So yeah, then that sort of wraps things up. I think I'm more or less on time. The website that Chapina, my wife, has put together has some information on some of the things I've talked about, particularly about pruning tomatoes. Also, just more generally, garden philosophy wise. So I'm sorry I forgot to put a slide with like my name or email, anything like that. Um, but let me. I can just type that up and then put it up there so that y'all can get that if anybody wants to have the contact information. But it'll take me like 2 seconds, right, to add a new slide. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can even do it in the same slide.
Okay, Brian's gonna type in his contact information here, and I'm gonna do a really brief presentation. I'm gonna try to keep it to 10 minutes. I'm gonna hand out some of these sheets here. I guess our goal today is that you guys can take some of what we talked about and just jot some ideas of your garden for planning for this season to be successful.
Yeah. What's the question? How is your house? Yeah.
Hi, I have a question for you. How you do to plant banana and how long it take to from the period you plant it to the harvest time?
Who doesn't eat banana as a big. You've never heard of it yet?
But as far as the time of growth for the bananas, so we planted them the first year and they were maybe like a foot tall or something like that. And they got probably 6 to 8 feet tall maybe in the first year. Then the second year, once they kept them alive over the winter, that's when they really started to grow like to their full size. And then they kind of form a clump, so they continue to expand every year. But like really by the end of the second year, they would be getting pretty big, I would say. Um, and there is a particular kind of banana you need to look for. Um, there's not a good like common name. Its scientific name is Musa Baju. I can type that up here. Uh, and we also actually have a couple we can probably share if somebody wants one.